Hey, everyone. Welcome back to So You're Ready to Date. And today we are going to talk about a little bit about getting serious and what that might look like. Is it time? What are the signs that you're seeing? We've done a lot of talking up until now about moving forward and getting on that second date, getting on that third date. And now you've been dating for a little while, hopefully, or if not, you can kind of go back to the beginning or jump ahead and we'll be talking about those things in some other episodes. But now that you've been dating for a while, what does that look like? And really, is it time? And I think we were gonna plan a little bit more ahead of time, but thought maybe you should be in on the discussion process here, because I think Lisa and I have a lot of similar ideas. Sometimes they're a little bit different, and it could be beneficial for everyone to hear, or for you guys all to come along with us as we discuss what those differences might look like.
Pulling the curtain back, seeing behind the scenes of the magic of how it all comes together. So get ready for a roller coaster of an episode, right? As we try to rein ourselves back in and onto the topic.
We usually do a really good job of sticking to the topics, but conversation and working things through, sometimes it's helpful to see both sides of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so just before we hit record, we were in the process of questioning whether or not most people have a conversation about whether or not to even become serious, and how you might find yourself in a serious relationship that you were not in or didn't know you were in.
Right? Because there's this moment like kind of second guessing myself. I'm like, you have that conversation, right? I mean, somebody has to bring it up, or is it just all of a sudden you're like, oh, I guess we're a thing. I didn't realize that this had happened. Is it one of those things that's not official until somebody's made the announcement on Facebook? I don't know how that works anymore.
And I think there are people that are in both camps, and I am firmly in the camp of you should have a discussion, and maybe that discussion isn't, hey, are we serious, or hey, are we exclusive? But there comes a point in time, right, when you are feeling confident and comfortable, and you might go in and turn off all of your dating apps, and the person that you're with may not. And there's some expectation that just because I do it means that you're going to do it. And that's not always the case if you don't have a conversation to set those expectations.
Yes. And I think that's where people get in trouble, when you have this idea that because I've done this, so-and-so is going to do the same thing. And so when we have that assumption of reciprocal action, I think that sometimes gets us into this place of, but I thought we were this. And they're like, but I thought we were this. And so then it becomes, okay, now we're having a whole different discussion, as opposed to, just having the guts, because this is a gutsy conversation. No matter how well you're getting along, how well things are going, this is being vulnerable. This is putting yourself out there, kind of opening yourself up. And I can see the part where you're like, I don't know that I want the possibility that there's going to be a rejection. I mean, I get that. We've all hoped, I'm assuming most of us have had that experience of putting ourselves out there and not maybe getting the response that we were hoping for. But I think this is how we build up that confidence in ourselves. This is how we're like, you take control, because sometimes this is the only thing you have a little bit of control over in that relationship, is kind of how you see it, what you want, what you need. And you have to clearly communicate that to the other person in order for anything to make sense going forward.
Feelings are hard, and that's okay. Feelings make us vulnerable, and putting ourselves out there can be hard, but that's okay. Feelings are hard, but that doesn't mean that you are not strong enough to have those conversations.
Right. And it's also one of those things that we can't always just like sidestep those feelings either. I think that's, sometimes it's about sitting in that little bit of suck, that little bit of like, wow, he still just wants to maybe casual date, or maybe she just wants to kind of see how things are going, give it a little bit more time. And again, sometimes it's about taking a step back and knowing that it's not necessarily about you as a person. A lot of it is about what that other person is doing, where they are in their journey, in their thought processes, and taking yourself out of it to an extent, that's like super hard. I get it. Cause again, we're talking feelings and that's involved, and nothing kind of gets straight to the gut of your like self-confidence, your belief in yourself, your, you know, whatever it is, your self-love, then somebody maybe not being quite on the same page that you are. But this is all stuff that needs to happen. If you want to have, I think, a successful relationship going forward, you need to be able to have these kind of conversations.
I would agree with that. I think communication is the cornerstone of a successful relationship, and finding that way to communicate. And I know for me, what works for me is to step back and do some reflection. How am I feeling? Check in with myself and see, am I ready for the next step? Am I in a good place? It doesn't necessarily matter where the other person is at. That's up to them to tell you, and you can't control that. But checking in with yourself and deciding where you're at in the relationship. And it's okay to do that at every step along the way, and at every point along the way, or any time that a question pops up, to sit back and reflect and say, where am I at? And are we on the same page? And let's talk about those online dating apps, right? You think we've been on 3 dates, 4 dates, 6 dates, 12 dates, however long it is, however much time has passed. I don't think there's a magic number, and we're not here to tell it, to say that there's a magic number, or to tell anybody that there's a magic number. But I think once you get to that point and you're ready to shut off those dating apps, as you're doing that, it's a good time to reflect. Okay, why am I shutting off the dating apps? How am I feeling about this? And where do I think this is going to go? And has it been a mutual discussion? Before you update your Facebook status, has it been a discussion? Are you official? I really don't think that anybody wants to find out that they are in a relationship with somebody through Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, that there has to have been some sort of fore discussion before you start, you know, posting stuff like that. And it's one of those things that I understand the thought of being exhausted about dating, finding somebody that you feel like you relatively click with, connect with, and wanting to kind of rush the process a little bit too, where it's not necessarily settling, but you're like, but this feels okay right now. This feels kind of safe, non-threatening. And that rush to want to make it something that maybe it's neither of you are really ready for, but there's this sense of, but if I'm exclusive with this person, then it means that I can push pause on the dating apps, however that is. And so when you're sitting in and checking with yourself, really being honest, is this because you're afraid that you're not going to find somebody else? And right now this person is checking enough of the boxes that you're like, it's better than nothing. Be really honest with yourself, because I think that's sometimes where we get ourselves in trouble, and maybe we've rushed something before both of us are really ready, is because we're like, this is the best I've come across so far. I better grab onto this before somebody else does, when maybe they're not quite the fit that they are for us if given a little bit more time. And maybe they end up being, but not rushing this process to want to be exclusive just because maybe we're exhausted with dating, just because maybe, you know, this feels like a good enough for us right now, as opposed to waiting for what is really aligned with us, what we really are worthy of and deserving. And so using that as part of your check-in, I think, as well, is helpful.
I think that's a great point. I know when Damon and I first got together, we made it past the quote unquote 4-month mark, which is pretty standard for new relationships. If you're going to break up, it's going to be at about that 4-month mark. We made it past that. We're going and we're going. And then people started asking us when we're going to move in together. And neither one of us are ready for that, even still to this day. So sitting back and giving yourself permission to let your relationship work for you and not be what other people expect it to be. It's okay if your relationship doesn't look like what your mother keeps asking you. It's okay if your relationship doesn't look like your sister's relationship or your best friend's relationship or the relationship that you had with your ex. Relationships can look very different, and just because it's something is right for someone doesn't mean that it's right for someone else. Maybe you live apart. Maybe you live together. Maybe you date for a year before you decide that you're going to have a sleepover. Your relationship needs to look right for you, and giving yourself permission to let that be okay before you decide that you're going to take that next step and get serious.
Right. Because isn't it about like that 3-month, 4-month part where it's less easy to keep up that mask? I feel like I've heard that somewhere, that those first 3 months, you're really good at, like, you're probably seeing each other occasionally, maybe every week, you have like some regular things going on, but you still have like that best foot forward mask. And once you hit like that 3 or 4 months, then it's like, yeah, I can't keep doing this. You're either going to like me because I leave all my stuff everywhere and hair in the sink and whatever it is, or this is going to be like where we call it quits kind of a thing. So you finally have relaxed enough to kind of let more of your true self come through. And I think being really comfortable and confident in who you are and what you want, and just, there are certain things that you get to a point where you're like, I'm not apologizing for that anymore because that's just who I am. I'm not saying like toxic anything, but there are certain things that, like, yeah, I'm this old now. I'm not changing these habits now. This is just who I am. And learning to love somebody for those things, as hopefully they start to love you for your things.
I think being honest, that you bring up a good point too. Being honest is important. And when you are honest with yourself and when you're honest with your partner, it makes for a healthier relationship. I know when Damon and I first got together, and still working on a lot of this stuff at that point, and still at this point, it is still an ongoing thing to maintain that healthy dating relationship because we don't live together. But when we first got together, he would stay over and I would get up and I would cook breakfast on the weekends in the morning. I don't like to cook. I don't do that. And so that had at one point become an expectation in our relationship. And it was time for me to step back and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. I do this when I want to do it for our relationship, but I don't really like to do this. And I don't want it to be an expectation. There is no expectation on this. And if I don't want to get up and cook in the morning, I'm not going to. And you can cook, or we can cook together, or we can go out, or you're on your own, whatever, and making sure that you're having some of those conversations and understanding where you're putting the mask on in the beginning, and maybe pulling a little bit of that back too, and knowing where you're going in the relationship before you take that firm step to say, yep, we're serious.
Right. Because again, all boils back down to that whole communication aspect. So hopefully as you're going on these dates, you're starting to figure out how they communicate, how you communicate, and seeing if, that's a little bit of a match. You want it to match in some respects so that you feel like you can communicate clearly and effectively. But I think, again, there's just that, that sense of, you're going to probably at some point have to have these conversations. So whether, I'm one of those people who needs some time to process. So I would much rather you text me something so that I have a little bit of time to think about it and process it, as opposed to you kind of, this sounds like a bad way to say it, but ambushing me with this topic that we're going to talk about and have to get heavy with, because then my brain goes into overload. Then I go into this space of, oh my gosh, I have to come up with an answer right now. I'm getting better at being able to say, you know what, I'm going to need some time to think about this. Can we talk about it at this particular time? But that's part of like learning to communicate, knowing their communication style, and knowing that it's maybe not one conversation. Maybe it's, hey, I want to kind of talk about where this is going. Do you have thoughts about this? And knowing that it's going to be an ever evolving conversation as you date more, as you get more serious, kind of as the relationship progresses.
And kind of going off that point, let's talk about moving into communication and approaching that topic, because we did talk about the fact that it is a vulnerable topic. It's a vulnerable thing to put your feelings out there and go through that. So what I like to do personally, something that works for me, is to write down and prepare for the conversation. And I sometimes will go all the way to write down exactly what I want to say, down to every A, every dot my I's, cross my T's. I write down exactly what I want to say to open it open the conversation, because that gives me space to process and it gives me a chance to rewrite it if it doesn't come out the way that I want it to.
That's an excellent point, because there's this idea that you're just supposed to have these conversations, and that for some reason preparing is, I don't know, there's just this idea that to prepare for a conversation like that, why would you need to do that? But you prepare for all kinds of big presentations and conversations in your life. And why not have your thoughts really clear? So like Angie said, so you're not miscommunicating something because you wrote this out in a big rush, taking the time to really think about it, write it out. That's something that you have suggested to me. I've used it a couple of times in having some big conversations, and I am much more calm approaching the conversation because I kind of have an idea in my mind of what points I want to make, what things I want to make sure I cover. Because without fail, what happens is you have these conversations, and then like 2 days later, you're like, I was going to say this, and I was going to bring that up, and I wanted to talk about this. But this gives you a way to really get your thoughts clear, to maybe step back from that feeling of being overly emotional, whether you're sad, you're angry, you're really excited, you're happy, coming from that space of a little bit more clear-headed, a little bit more level-headed, and being able to have a conversation about this without letting errant emotions maybe overrun this and take over what you wanted to say.
Exactly. And you said a little bit ago, you had made a point about how to approach that conversation. And it can be easy and casual too. So we talked about a very serious way to sit down and have that, but maybe it's a check-in point. So it may not be about getting serious, but maybe we're just going to decide that it's still going to be casual, but we're going to be casual and exclusive, right? That's a step along the way. You go from this casual thing where we're going out on a date or two, and you might be dating some other people at the same time, to going to a casual but exclusive. We're not boyfriend, girlfriend. We have no expectations on each other, but we're not seeing other people either. And moving from that point into the exclusive. And maybe that's not how your relationship works. Maybe that's not how it looks. Again, you have to do what's right for you. We're not telling you what order your relationship needs to go in, but having that, hey, you know what, I'm kind of liking where this is going. It's kind of fun. Can we have a conversation about where you see this headed, and whether or not we're on the same page?
Yeah. And I think then that becomes on you how the conversation goes. Are you still okay with them keeping it casual and seeing other people? And if you're not, then that's going to be that next hard conversation where you're like, you know what, I really like you, but I'm done dating casually. I really am feeling some feelings for you. I want this to be more exclusive. And if they're not there, you have to make those tough decisions. Like, is it okay for me to kind of hang out in this casual for a little bit longer and see? Or are you really firm and being like, no, I need this to go in this certain kind of like path? And then it might mean that hard conversation of, I think maybe it's best if we break up or not see each other anymore, because I'm looking for something to maybe progress to a little bit more serious, maybe a little bit faster.
Yes, all of that. I think that's a good point. And so being prepared for that conversation means more than writing out what you're going to say. It also means understanding that there are multiple avenues and what's going to happen if it doesn't come out the way that you want it to. Are you ready to walk away if they're not ready to take that next step and you are? Are you comfortable just knowing where they're at and staying on the same page and making sure that you're kind of walking a parallel path? What does that look like for you, and what's going to happen after that conversation happens, and being prepared for that too. So I think that's another way that you can prepare and make having those conversations feel a little bit better, even though you're putting yourself in a position to be very vulnerable.
So I'm going to share a story here because it's very appropriate to the topic. We're going to keep it very general so that there's no identifying characteristics. But yes, I have recently had a conversation with somebody that I had been casually dating. Did I pick the most opportune time to do it? Absolutely 100% not. And he happens to be halfway across the world in India at the moment. We decided we weren't technically breaking up, but we were keeping it open. I kind of got the sense that I wanted to see if he was ready for it to be exclusive. He was not. I kind of pressed here's where you kind of learn some lessons. He was like, I don't know if I can have these conversations with me being so far away. I got it in my head. No, I need to know, I need to rip this Band-Aid off. And I pressed and I got an answer. And I don't think he was giving me an answer to make me upset. I truly believe that this is what he was feeling. He wasn't ready to be exclusive. And then I had to step back and be like, okay, we still have 2 more months. At this point, he was still going to be gone for almost 2 more months of, traveling around and doing his thing. And I'm like, okay, for 2 more months, we can kind of keep it casual. I'm going to still keep dating people. If I find somebody I like, I don't know what he's doing. I haven't asked him that. He doesn't ask me. That's not really what we have communicated about. If we were seeing other people, I think it was just this understanding that we were going to date. We weren't going to say much about it, but we still made time to see each other. So yeah, there was a week that I was mad and I was upset and we did not talk. I mean, we've been talking sporadically because, there's a 10-hour time difference. It makes it a little bit difficult to have like regular conversations when it's like midnight his time, 6 a.m. my time kind of a thing. Makes it a little bit tough to have that. So yeah, there was a whole week we didn't communicate because I was mad and I was upset and my feelings were hurt, but it was a conversation we should have had before he left. We should have been really clear about what our expectations were. They weren't, because I was afraid to have that conversation full out. I didn't want to have the thought that maybe he didn't want to keep it for the 3 months he was gone. We were just going to break up. But knowing what I know now, I was coming at this from a space of feeling like, well, I need to lock this down because I was dating some real questionable people at this point too. So it was coming from not from a place of really wanting this, but more of a place from fear. I can see that now. In the moment, I didn't. So learning that sometimes these conversations are going to come from this space of, I'm just afraid that I'm going to lose this thing that's relatively good. It's not necessarily 100% what I want, but it's, better than the douchebags that have been floating through here lately. And I think I definitely got back what I was kind of putting out there in that respect. So while these conversations can make you step back, I'm like, yeah, we're better about texting now. We've kind of come back to our old rhythm. When he gets back in a month, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll probably go on a couple of dates, kind of see how things feel, but maybe that's just the end of it. But it was putting myself out there. It was getting vulnerable, asking the question that I needed the answer to. Was not necessarily in the best way to do it, but live and learn. And I think that's where you kind of get that for the next time. The next person that I kind of get serious with, the next one who I have, those conversations, I have a little bit better idea of how to maybe appropriately bring up that topic so that it's at a time where we both can process and handle and deal with that information, because he had been telling me that I was just not reading those kind of things into it. So I think sometimes that's the situation too, where you get that idea of like breadcrumbing, where they're giving you just enough, kind of that idea that yes, they're interested in this and it's just enough to kind of keep you hooked, but maybe they're not quite ready for that to be serious. So that's why we kind of suggest having these conversations, because I think it only benefits everybody to know exactly where you stand. And then for you to step back and be like, what do I need to do with this? Do I want to break up and be done with it? Or am I okay just kind of keeping it casual for now, giving it a little bit more time, and then checking in with somebody again?
Great point all the way around. And a great reminder that sometimes we see what we want to see, and it's okay. These conversations are necessary for that check-in on top of everything else. Even if it's not about getting serious, even if it's not about taking the next step, but just making sure that we're not putting our blinders on and just seeing what we want to see, and having those real relationships and keeping that line of communication open, because our experience is going to be very different than our partner's experience. Even if we're doing the same things, even if we're living the same relationship, our experiences are both very different.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the whole like blinders thing, because I think that can get really easy, that you interpret certain actions as meaning, oh, well, he wants to be my boyfriend or she wants to be my girlfriend. But sometimes it's just like, I'm just being nice. So I think by having those conversations and maybe having those boundaries of being like, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z in a relationship. If you're not ready for that, I can't have you doing things that feel boyfriend or girlfriend like, because I think that confuses things a little bit too. If you're not ready for that next step, then I'm going to need to have us both temper our expectations as to what each person kind of puts forth into that relationship.
Yeah. And all of this to say, as we kind of wrap this up talking about it, all of that to say that we're weeding out and talking about moving on so that you can find what you really want and kind of letting go of a lot of what you don't want. So this is all coming from within, figuring out what you want, where you're at, and having that conversation for yourself. Now, it's great that the other person's involved. You need the other person involved, but this is to help, all of this is to help make the whole dating process easier for you and to speed up the time frame that it takes for you to find the soulmate you're looking for.
Wonderfully put. Yes. Again, figuring out what you want is going to be the key to all of this, right? But if you have if you have questions about having these serious conversations, please email us. We would happily provide like a template. So our email address is soyourereadytodate@gmail.com. As always, it'll be in the show notes. But, you know, if you're having questions or concerns or, you know, want some additional like feedback or insight into that, please let us know. We would like to at some point do a Q&A kind of episode where we can answer maybe rapid fire a bunch of questions. So make sure you're sending those in so that we know that what is specifically you have questions about.
And with that, we will see you next week.